All right, an adjournment there at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry sitting at the Bridget Mabandla Justice College in Pretoria. On the stand today, Dr. Godfrey Libeya, of course, the former DPCI or Hawkshead Lieutenant General Evidence Leader, Advocate Lee Siegels Ncube, has been taking us through two statements and his one of them being his sworn affidavit, of course, and the supplementary statement. His cross-examination will be dealt with at a later stage, and of course that date will be confirmed later, but the commission does resume tomorrow. Now, just briefly touching on some of the things that came out of that second statement, which was requested by the commission, including the multi-million rand Arrowton drug bust and, of course, Port Shepstone storage and major drug consignment theft there. On the latter part, in terms of the Port Shepstone, General Musikili's ultimate report made several recommendations, including that Libeya appoint a senior functionary at the level of a major general to lead investigations to establish whether misconduct was committed in the handling and the storage of some of those exhibits. Now, Libeya confirmed that the investigation was not done, but insisting that the investigation should have been initiated by KZN Hawkshead Lesija Sonona at that particular time. He's also been addressing a number of other issues coming out of that supplementary statement, including how he handled the complaints against IDEC head Lieutenant IDEC head Andrea Johnson. Tembekile Mkhototo monitoring those developments for us very closely. So Tembekile, today's proceedings were essentially meant to allow, of course, Dr. Libeya to only read out those two statements into record, given that his cross-examination will then be set aside for a later date. I guess the level of clarity-seeking questions that we heard there from the commissioners give us just a scale of how much he will have to answer to when he is ultimately cross-examined, including, of course, decisions he took or chose not to take during his time as the national head of the Hawks.
Well, Nati, good afternoon. So there'll be plenty for the former head of the Hawks, Dr. Godfrey Libeya, to deal with when he comes back to the Madlanga Commission for cross-examination, because right at the beginning we were told that in fact his statement, that very first statement that he read out, is possibly the longest that any of the witnesses here at the Commission have read before the start of their cross-examination. He's gone back, in fact, well over 10 years in terms of the internal dynamics and politics of the country's police service at a management level, but he's made it very clear that ultimately his mission here at the Commission is to clear his name. He's presented himself as a man of high integrity who does not, in his own words, associate himself with any criminality. Let's bring in SABC News senior reporter Kenny Mapanga with me as always here at the Commission. Kenny, so let's pick up on the latter issues that are being dealt with now. The drug busts came up again, especially that Port Shepstone one, where drugs were seized, taken to a Hawks facility that we now know was nowhere near equipped to keep those safe, so much so that they were in fact stolen at some point. And for Libeya, the problem now appears to be that he may have ignored or failed to act on a recommendation by his then deputy to actually investigate whether members of the Hawks would have been involved in the theft.
Yes, and I think he relied on a substantiation that was too little in order to place before the probe that he had trusted a particular resolve, and that is why he took the decision that he took. He also is facing a number of issues with respect to the Colonel Rolofsa incident, and of course that protected disclosure and how he handled it with respect to the NDPP, Advocate Shamila Batoyi, and the kind of expectations that the Hawks officers that were working on this, because the allegation is overall that Johnson was, or the former IDAC head, Advocate Andrea Johnson, was allegedly protected in terms of the witness, I think it's witness O, protected disclosure. And that was the disclosure about the call to her via Major General Faraz Khan, where she was asked to furnish him with those particular documents that dealt with the criminal complaint that was made by another officer against Major General Faraz Khan. And the inference there is that it enabled him to prepare himself for that warning statement. And of course, in terms of the protected disclosure, it also prepared Johnson for her particular defense with respect to that conduct that fell outside of the scope of what is expected in terms of dealing with a complaint of this nature, and it raised questions or allegations of impropriety. So there are a number of incidents in which Dr. Godfrey Lebeya faces allegations of either a lack of leadership, a failure in oversight, but seemingly conducting or giving certain instructions that certainly do not make sense. And if you go back to the original complaint where you see Hawks feature, because the Hawks have featured quite a bit in the Madlanga Commission across several different themes. If you go back to the initial allegation, it was about the Katiso Katie Molefe operation takedown, and it seems that he holds the posture that the mere call from an individual saying that there was an impersonation was enough for him to deploy to go verify. But we know that the scene was seemingly not as he relays to the commission. We know that through the evidence that allegedly even Hawks officers themselves, Tom's officers, were saying, why are we even here? This is a legitimate operation. Why are we still here? We have other work to do. And that is going to be something that he's going to have to explain, because something like verifying Hawks officers doesn't need the entire contingent to, descend on this one house. It could have been verified by the nearby police station. There's also something suspicious about the fact that those Hawks officers did not withdraw immediately upon finding out that these were legitimate officers conducting a legitimate operation. Absolutely. There was a lot of back and forth at that scene before those officers eventually left. Also, it was deeply chaotic, confrontational, and a scene that could have resulted in what he describes as friendly fire, because we understand it was a hostile environment for all the officers that were involved, and that a confrontation did take place. A heated confrontation took place at the house of Katiso Katie Molefe, who, by the way, is implicated in the Amon Swart murder, which deals with a whistleblower in the tender fraud relating to Transnet. And that particular case has actually opened up the commission to the world of ballistics and how they were able to attach one firearm used in the Amon Swart scene to several other spates of murders in the Gauteng province, including that of the murder of popular musician DJ Somebody. So it's very serious allegations that the Hawks are facing, and at this stage you're dealing with a witness that holds the view that he had not done anything wrong in this particular regard. He even goes to the extent of painting a history of his career and how he's been dealt with when he was actually the one who would go against interference, or at least that's what the evidence suggests, and even goes to the extent of intimating certain things by referring to the relationship between three key individuals in this evidence is General Masimola, Lieutenant General Dumsani Khumalo, and KZN Top Cop, Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. He paints them as a trio who allegedly have always looked after one another.
So they promoted and appointed
one another. And we know what the subtext of that particular statement is in the context of what he's being asked to answer to, because the PKTT was there to support the GCI ops when they pounced on that particular scene, because it was clear, Khumalo in his testimony stated that in terms of that particular environment and climate, because of what happened with the raids at Kat Matlala's home and how he had allegedly been given the heads up, they couldn't trust in that situation that it would be any different, which is why the PKTT comes in to this operation as well. So certainly when he returns, even though there's a lengthy statement and a supplementary, there's still a lot of answers that he will have to go through in order to test his version, but also verify if indeed there was nothing ulterior to it, because it still does not come clear as to why the Hawks went there and they stayed there for such a significant period of time, even though once they learned that that was a legitimate operation, they didn't pull out, and why he carries the expectation that Lieutenant General Dumsani Khumalo was supposed to inform him that there was an operation that was supposed to take place. So certainly with that evidence, it's still not clear yet. Even with all the Hawks officers that came before Lebeya to explain it, it was still chaotic and made no sense. And certainly with that incident, the incident of the protected disclosure, and other incidents that the Hawks have to answer to under Lebea's watch. There's certainly more questions that will emerge when he returns at a date yet to be announced.
Something else that came up, the name of Paul O'Sullivan, this time coming up in the context of a call that Dr. Lebea says he received, an inquiry, in fact, from Paul O'Sullivan related to the Phala Phala investigation. And he says at the time O'Sullivan was basically with Bejani Chauke, who we know has worked even with the president closely within the ANC and government circles.
Yes, he mentions that. There's a lot of statements in the statement of General Lebea that you don't understand what the relevance is or what he's trying to convey in that particular statement. But he does mention the call of Paul O'Sullivan, who he said that he was sitting with a Dr. Bejani Chauke about this particular matter. And I think that was in the realm of the topic or the theme of alleged interference when he was dealing with that particular theme and different instances thereof. Then he mentions that particular call as well. He also mentions calls from Brown Mokgotsi that he says he refused to answer. So it's one of those portions in the statement where it's not clear what he was trying to convey.